Disclaimer. The views expressed in this video, as well as the content and images, are for review purposes only. If you are interested in what we are reviewing, please pick up a book and form your own opinions. What I like and dislike, others may not like or dislike. Reading is a very individual thing. If you do pick up the book, please leave a review, as this not only helps out authors financially, but is essential to helping us improve our skills. Furthermore, if you'd like to support me and my channel, you can follow the links down in the descriptions to my own works and my own books. And you can also help out by liking or commenting below and subscribing to the channel. Welcome to spring, ladies and gentlemen. The days are getting warmer, people are wearing less, and all of nature is having very not safe for YouTube activities in the open. I can't think of a better time to sit inside and avoid the tree pollen Woodstock and read about genetically altered humans traveling the universe to beat up everyone and everything that looks at them funny. But first, some shameless self-promotion. I'm doing another giveaway with Goodreads, this time of my second book, Hapless, Homesteader. It's a wonderful tale about a programmer named Bob who had the great misfortune of missing the apocalypse and now has to figure out how to survive in his empty city. The giveaway starts on May 17th and ends on May 26th. I will leave a link in the description. On to our story, and it's one I've actively been avoiding for years. I'm a big fan of some Warhammer 40k lore channels. I find the world interesting and the memes funny. So why would I avoid the books? Well, mostly because I'm afraid they'll suck. I've put it off for long enough, and this week we're starting from the beginning of the timeline with Horus Rising, the first book in the Horus Heresy series. Before I get into the recap, I want to mention a few things. First, this book series is over 100 entries long, and there are multiple authors involved. I'm aware there's some controversy over the characters not being consistent from book to book. This is just a way of dipping my toe into the actual setting and not just experiencing it through the memes and the lore channels. Second, the Warhammer 40k universe has a tremendous amount of lore, so I'll have to give you the briefest of preface before I begin the timeline for the actual story of the book. So this is actually set in the 30th millennium, not the 40th millennium like the main games are. This is about 29,000 years after our own time. Humanity has been scattered throughout the galaxy. The former civilizations of humanity have crumbled due to a galaxy-wide storm that lasted, I believe, but don't quote me on this, a few thousand years. On Earth, a giant of a man emerged and united all the warring tribes that existed there and crowned himself Emperor of Mankind. He created several sons through radical and unknown bioengineering and named them the Primarchs. From their DNA, the Emperor created super soldiers out of common men known as Astartes or Space Marines. They're literally twice as tall and twice as wide as your average human, but we'll go more into their physical descriptions later. Now that the scene is set, let's begin our timeline. I was there when Horus slew the Emperor. This is literally the first line of the book, and foreshadowing for those in the know. This, however, is not foreshadowing of when Horus slays the Emperor of Mankind. That apex is a much later point in the story that's in a much later book. This is a story being told by our main character of this book, Garville Loken. Loken is the captain of the 10th Company of the Lunar Wolves Astartes. He's regaling others in his company of the story of how the Great Crusade to unify humanity ran into an empire that claimed to be another Terran empire. Even their capital was named Terra. When the false Terra was found, envoys were dispatched, including a very famous member of Garville's own chapter. Unfortunately, the new Terra was run by what must have been the descendant of Vlad Tepes because all the envoys were killed. This doesn't sit well with the Lunar Wolves, who deploy 4 full companies to enlighten this false emperor on the error of his ways. The fight proves slightly difficult. This empire is fairly advanced and has some fairly impressive technology, and it's technology the Lunar Wolves haven't encountered before. The book does make a big deal about this being more of a trial among equals, whereas past fights were just trials in general. But the Space Marines seem to handle this fight with relatively few losses. Even when they encounter the false emperor's bodyguards, the Invisibles, the Astartes bolters, which are basically automatic grenade launchers, make fairly short work of these guys despite the fact that they can manipulate light, make themselves invisible, and basically fry somebody with light manipulation techniques somehow. It's during this battle that Loken and the captain of the first company make a bet over who can reach the false emperor first. Loken is actually the one who wins and reaches the throne room, and it's there he finds a very, very, very old man who basically says he refuses to yield. And I'm not sure if it's pity or just astonishment that stopped Loken, but Loken spends a good bit of time trying to convince this man to surrender, assuming that this is the emperor he was looking for. The old man says he will surrender, but only to the man in charge. This man is not happy with the fact that Loken is just the mere 10th Company commander and wants to talk to the guy who's in charge of the big war. Let me speak to the manager and whatnot. Seems to be a fairly questionable request, considering he's facing down a power-armored giant, but I guess when you're about to die, you don't really have to worry about what requests you make. But Loken tells him that War Master Horus is too busy to do such a thing. Soon more Astartes arrive, and a debate ensues as to whether or not to call the War Master in to accept the surrender, whether it's honorable or not, whether it's a good idea or not, whether they have the time for it, blah 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 blah. Eventually Loken is convinced to honor the old man's request for little more than diplomatic reasons. I guess he's thinking maybe it'll make the transition a little easier. It would be kind of like the end of World War II where America allowed Japan to keep its emperor. It's just making sure things stay smooth and level. It's shortly after the call is made to Horus, and Horus agrees to show up, that Loken has a suspicion. The suspicion is that the old man is not the emperor. The real false emperor has been using the same invisibility technology that they've been fighting the whole way up here to hide in plain sight, right on his own throne. No sooner does Loken level his dramatically overkill weapon at the gaudy chair that a defensive system activates and everyone living in the room is sent flying. Except for the false emperor, of course. This force is overwhelming and threatens to basically kill everyone in the room. They can't see it. It's described as kind of like a searing wind. But just as everybody's about to die, Horus, who is to the Astartes what the Astartes are to normal people, teleports right in front of the false emperor, and leveling an even bigger weapon than the Astartes have, turns him into a charred skeleton. We're brought back to the ship where Loken has been telling the tale, but the tale is ended by circumstance and Loken retreats to his own chambers. It's while he's pretty much naked and anointing himself with oils and powders and exploring his very Spartan room for whatever reason, that he hears a knock on the door, and he is greeted by a visitor, a remembrancer. Now, this is a mix of chronicler and journalist. Artists, writers, poets, and etc. were gathered up from Earth and sent on the crusade to document and basically create propaganda, to let the people of the Terran Empire know that all the resources that they were working for and towards weren't being wasted. This remembrancer wants to hear the rest of the story. After some back and forth, Loken agrees. We get a little more of the story with the funeral for the false emperor. It's decided that there needs to be a Space Marine presence at the funeral as a show of honor to the newly conquered. Nothing more than optics, really. But it shouldn't be the Lunar Wolves who, basically did terrible, terrible things there. So another chapter is brought in. We then skip over to an Orator class. It turns out during the long trips between planets, Space Marines have classes in training. This is some kind of preparation for eventually one day there won't be any war, ha ha ha, and the Space Marines will have to find themselves something to do when they aren't Space Marining. When the class ends, Loken approaches the teacher to have a conversation, and it's brought up that Loken has been asked to join the Mournival, which is a small council of sorts. They're an informal inner circle for the War Master. Loken is a bit trepidatious about it, but is convinced it's worthy of time and that he's worthy of doing it. Later that night, he attends the induction ceremony where he is greeted by the other 3 members of this council. Loken is kind of dubious about the whole affair because he says it feels a lot more like a religious ceremony. They're doing this by the light of a moon. There's all sorts of vows and whatnot that they have to take. Not that he's had a lot of trouble with the vows that they have to take other times because they all have to take an oath of moment, but in this case he's a little trepidatious. They assure him that this is a very old and very time-honored tradition and that he should just kind of go with it. It's meant to be a memorable moment for him, and they want it to be a memorable moment for him, so he understands the gravity of the situation. Now keep in mind, this is 30K. This is the 30th millennium, where the Imperium was atheistic zealots, rather than 40K, where they're religious zealots. Just to clear things up. The Great Crusade that they're on is to remove religion from the galaxy and unite humanity, not to spread the Imperium's religion, which currently, in this timeline, doesn't exist yet. Accepting their reasoning, Loken gives in, and soon they're engraving a crescent moon onto his helmet to signify his new, unofficial position. It feels very weird that you would get an inscription for an unofficial position, but oh well. We return to False Terra, and there's a problem. There are rebels in the south. Unfortunately, the whole crusade is getting ready to leave because the world has been pacified. There's even a farewell party going on for the new planetary governor. Horus is at the party and playing the part of the diplomat, wishing the governor good fortune on his newly compliant planet. The governor basically says, "But we got those rebels in the south. We aren't compliant. Come on, you guys can't just leave us like this. What are we supposed to do?" Horus does some hemming and hawing, asking members of the Mournival what to do, specifically Loken. When the question is brought to Loken, he basically says, unleash the wolves on them again. He wants his chapter specifically to be unleashed on the rebels, to bring the planet into better compliance. Horus acts reluctant, but agrees. It's revealed to Loken while he's in transit to the south that Horus wanted to unleash his Space Marines on the rebels, but he uses his inner circle to suggest it so that he can save face. Horus is trying to look like the peacekeeper while using this council to get the things that he wants, while looking like he doesn't want them. When they enter the southern lands, everyone starts to hear a voice from a being named Samus. Convinced it's just clever enemy propaganda to dishearten his forces, they press on. It turns out this area has major religious significance to the False Terrans, and Samus is their version of the devil. The Imperials have a good laugh at the silly religious monkeys and send the gene-enhanced murderers to do what they do best. It's near the end of this conflict that something odd happens. One of Loken's men calls him over to see something amazing. This Marine's going on a kind of crazy rant, saying that he can see words in the water that come and go, and the words are the name of Samus, and he's not making a lot of sense and kind of weirding out everybody around him, and then he lifts his bolter, the automated grenade launcher, and shoots one of his fellow Astartes. Everyone is horrified by this, and as soon as they get over their shock, quickly incapacitates the possessed battle brother. And this is where I will leave off the recap. This brings you to about the 20% mark of the book, and there's a lot going on here, including a whole section I didn't cover where one of the Remembrancers runs his mouth and basically gets kicked to death by a bunch of soldiers. I really wanted to cover it, but for time constraint, we're not going to do that. So let's get into my likes. The Space Marines is where I want to start, because I have some likes and dislikes about them. The book goes into great detail about how they look similar, but distinctly different to humans. Weirdly distorted, and slightly equine faces. They have solid ribs, their muscles are kind of bulbous and overgrown. They're also about 10 feet tall, and just massive slabs of muscle. The descriptions are also not all at once. We get them kind of scattered throughout the beginning of the book. And it's not just their bodies that are different. The book also lets us know, through Loken, that the Astartes don't know fear. Now, he's not really clear on whether it's been genetically removed from them, if they're just trained to not know fear, but I think it's that they're genetically altered to have a lessened fear response, if not no fear response. This is actually shown in the story. Even when they're horrified at the prospect of their own killing each other, it's more shock than fear they express. And none of them seem to have any kind of PTSD about it. They're just kind of in shock about it. It's an unthinkable thing to them. It's just something they can't seem to comprehend. And the story is mostly told from the perspective of a space marine, and it feels mildly alien to a normal person's way of thinking, which I really do like. I like looking into another being's mind, a different way of approaching things. We do have a few sections that are told from a remembrancer's point of view, but his section ends when he gets drunk and says some things some soldiers didn't like, and they basically attempt to beat him to death. The action's also fairly well done, at least for what action there was. It was quick, gave enough detail, and didn't just sneak up on you like some works. This being a book about genocidal genetically enhanced super soldiers, the action scenes are really important, at least in my eyes. This is about a great crusade going across space to reunite humanity. There's supposed to be a lot of fighting. In fact, the tagline for 40K is, "In the grimdark future, there's only war." That's as close as I'm going to get to it. I do also really like the setting. This probably has more to do with the small amount of fanboy I have for the IP, but I do like it. It feels rich and detailed. At no point does it feel confined. New stuff comes up often that challenges the main characters, and not just physical conflict, but beliefs and politics and personal lives. As I often say, I do enjoy politics in books. Not real-world politics, but in-world politics. Horus uses his Mournival to get the things he wants. It's said they're advisors, but they feel more like tools. I can see how he uses the different personalities on his council to get the outcome he wants. He knows that Loken himself is very straight-laced and will give him the by-the-book answer when he's asked. There's another member who's more aggressive, who will give him a more aggressive answer if he wants. I can see how each member of the council could be used to give him the situation he desires, and if he wants to tweak it, he can ask another one and form an amalgamation. It's a very clever ploy, or at least I think it's a clever ploy. And he can use all of this to do the things he wants and make it appear that it's something he has to do rather than what he wants to do, giving him some plausible deniability. That way he can keep playing the peacekeeper. He can keep looking like the good guy. Moral implications of making your own soldiers look like the bad guy aside, it can be a very useful tool. Basically, his soldiers can kind of disappear into the ranks of his other soldiers, and he can kind of downplay it and defend them when necessary. Now, let's move on to the things I didn't like. This book is a little dialogue heavy. There's a lot of time spent with people just talking to Loken. It does make the story drag in spots, and more than once I had to go back and reread a section because I wasn't quite sure what was being said. Also, the dialogue is kinda flat, at least among the Astartes. This could be due to their genetic enhancements removing a number of emotions like fear. It could also be due to their military nature and training. And it could also be because they've been fighting for several hundred years and that affects the mind. It's not so bad that it makes the characters hard to tell apart. Often I could tell the characters apart by what they were saying. It can make their conversations a little stale. The story also jumps around a bit. The flashbacks are handled like they're the present and can make for a confusing transition at times. Even when not dealing with the flashbacks, I had a few times where I had trouble telling where we were. Since the cast is fairly small and many characters follow Loken around, it can also add to the confusion. Aside from Loken, I don't feel like we got a lot of growth out of other important characters, Horus being among them. Now, this is the first book in a massive series, and I'm going to mention again, it has, I think, over 100 books in it. Horus is the eventual antagonist. The series is named after him. If you're even slightly familiar with 40K, you know what he does. This story is how the most loyal of the Emperor's son betrays him in the end. I just wish we'd spent a bit more time with him. We're told he's this amazing flamboyant diplomat, and we only get to see a little bit of that. And I'm not sure if it's enough to give me a taste for the series or not. So then let's move on to my thoughts. I am kind of interested in seeing what will happen with the main character. I'm a little familiar with the Horus Heresy lore, but not as much as I would like. That's mainly due to my own time. I'm pretty sure it's going to be terrible. This is known as a grimdark series. This is the first book. A lot of the terrible stuff might not have happened yet, or we can't really expect too much of it to happen yet. I'm not sure how I feel about the point of view. Horus and the Primarchs, Horus's brothers basically, are major players in the story, but none of them are the POV character. I can understand the problem with using them too much. These are supposed to be near demigods, far beyond our ability to understand. They don't have emotions like you or I do. And when they show emotions, it's often an act. But I feel like that could be really interesting itself. This super smart being struggling to look genuine to a group of lesser people. The things he finds difficult or trying about us. I hope later in the series we get more time with these impossibly powerful beings to get to understand them more, especially since they're going to be major players in the story. Also, for grimdark, this doesn't feel very grim or very dark. It might be because this is supposed to be a relatively calm time compared to the major story of the franchise. There are some gory bits. There's a wonderful section where the Astartes are fighting giant bugs that pick them up and impale them on these giant concrete trees. But the Space Marines are so competent and lack the fear that most of us would have in that situation that it doesn't feel grim or dark. It's not even that scary. The bugs are basically mindless and the Marines are fearless, so I have no emotional connection to either one. Maybe I just have problems empathizing with giant genetically enhanced murder machines. I did enjoy the story. I've been both wanting and not wanting to get into Black Library. Most of my fear stems from some of the writers getting more political in current years. But this series is a little bit older. I think this book was originally published in 2006, so I might be able to go pretty far into it before I start seeing too much of the modern day politics. I've heard both good and bad things from people who have read the series, a daunting task considering its size. These books do share something with some other books that I've read based on popular games, that being the Magic the Gathering books. References is what I'm talking about. Every once in a while, it's nice to have a good cringe, but it's still cringe. Like when the Magic books reference game mechanics and when 40K books mention their taglines. It's the same feeling when a movie mentions its title. Luckily, it doesn't happen often, and in both the books' cases I'm referencing, it wasn't too bad. It's just that it pulls you out of the story, and I really hope there aren't too many more as the series goes on. And with that said, I wish you all good luck. Thank you for listening to my review. If you have any books that you would like to hear my take on, please leave them in the description. I do tend to favor indie authors over conventionally published, but I will read whatever I find interesting or whatever captures my fancy. If you would like to read, review, or criticize my own works, I will include a link in the description. Also, please keep the comments civil in the comments section. Also, if you enjoy what I do, please consider giving this video a like, sharing my work, or subscribing to my channel. Thank you.